Hello, everybody. Welcome back to What We Do in the Shadows. I mean, what? I mean, the gentleman psychic. As you know, my darlings, I have to go over here to the medias of social and the book of faces, and I have to see where I am here. Hold on, let me see. Why is it not showing? Aha, there we go. And we must share. Let's go here. And I will leave the comment underneath so that people can find where I am. They can find me. And then I have to go over to the front part of it and paste it here. Join me live. Story time starts now. Post it there. And then we have one more media of a social that we have to go to. We have to go over to the Gentleman Psychic Facebook page. And then we go here. Paste. Story time starts now. And we publish. And then we go down over here to, oh, yes, this post. And we write here, paste on that. And where am I? We go here and we do the paste. So many things. Hello, Lucifer's girl. Hello, Mary Jane King. Good evening. Let me see. We'll scroll on down. I have a few that I have to post on, as you well know. It is, well, I think I've done my duty. Hello, Christy Cragen. Hello, good to see you. So I started off with welcoming you to What I Do in the Shadows. And the reason I welcomed you to What We Do in the Shadows is because, let's turn that just a little, because people like to ask me if I am in fact a vampire. And so, hello, good evening, Anne. And I have a very funny story to tell you. I think it's funny. I think it's hilarious. So, I am certainly not a vampire, or am I? I'll let you decide which is the truth. But many years ago, I told people that I was 300 and some odd years old. And the funny story was that people believed me. So maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I'll let you decide, whatever it may be. Hello, Diana. Lovely to see you. Good evening. Okay, well, I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is all warm and cozy, or as I prefer to be, cold and not so cozy. That's what I actually really like. I do have the fan on because it gets rather warm in the summer. And even though I'm wearing cool lights, I mean, it's a cool suit with cool lights. It is also summer in New York. So it is rather humid, and I don't do well with humidity. Also, another funny little story you may have noticed. So I have previously cut my mustache way too short. So I'm regrowing it out to make it thicker and broader, sort of like I had on the logo of my channel. It's me with the goatee and the thicker mustache, and that's what I'm growing it back to be. So that is good. Yes, making it bigger. I happen to love a good mustache. I think everyone should have them, especially the ladies. That's my thought. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Story Time. I don't know where we're going with this. Have I read 20,000 Leagues Into the Sea? I don't think I've ever actually read it myself. So this is the first time for me. We are about 2/3 of the way through. Will we finish tonight? Absolutely not. So there's still more time to experience. I do have a book picked out for this coming for next story time. It was a gift from my very dear friend Mary Jane. I hope I can say that. And then I have a suggestion from my producer Rob Cohen, and I'm looking forward to reading that one as well. It's a little older than I typically do, but it is a psychological thriller. So hopefully I can find that book, locate it, and read it for you. I was hoping that we would have a few more people. I don't see Courtney yet, but Courtney, oh, you know what? I'm going to actually send the link to Courtney because I know she and Nathan enjoy it. Let me see here. Courtney Buckley. Courtney Buckley is, of course, my castmate in Scared and Alone, which is on hiatus for a little while during the month because of some things. Good evening, Mr. John Maxwell. Good evening. So lovely to have every one of you. All right, well, I suppose I've waited long enough. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, and those who are somewhere in the middle, I present to you 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Book 2, Chapter 10. The submarine coal mines. The next day, the 20th of February, I woke very late. The fatigues of the previous night had prolonged my sleep until 11 o'clock. I dressed quickly and hastened to find the course that the Nautilus was taking. The instruments showed it to be still toward the south, with a speed of 20 miles an hour and a depth of 50 fathoms. The species of fish here did not differ much from those already noticed. There were rays of giant size, 5 yards long, and endowed with a great muscular strength, which enabled them to shoot above the waves. Sharks of many kinds, among others, a glacis 15 feet long with triangular sharp teeth, and whose transparency rendered it almost invisible in the water. Brown sagre, humanitans, prism-shaped and clad with the tuberculosis hide, sturgeons resembling their conjoiners of the Mediterranean, trumpet syntheses, a 1.5 feet long, furnished with grayish bladders, without teeth or tongue, and as supple as snakes. Among bony fish, Council noticed some blackish marine eyes, about 3 yards long, armed at the upper jaw with a piercing sword. Other bright-colored creatures known in the time of Aristotle by the name of the sea dragon, which are dangerous to capture on account of the spikes on their back. Also some coryphaeans with brown backs marked with little blue stripes and surrounded with gold border, some beautiful dorades and swordfish 24 feet long, swimming in troops, fierce animals, but rather herbivorous and carnivorous. About 4 o'clock, the soil, generally composed of thick mud mixed with petrified wood, changed by degrees, and it became more stony and seemed strewn with conglomerate and pieces of basalt, with a sprinkling of lava and sulphurous obsidian. I thought that mountainous region was succeeding the long plains, and accordingly, after a few evolutions of the Nautilus, I saw the southerly horizon blocked by a high wall, which seemed to close all exit. Its summit, evidently past the level of the ocean, it must be a continent, or at least an island, one of the Canaries or the Cape Verde Islands. The bearings not being yet taken, perhaps designedly, I was ignorant of our exact position. In any case, such a wall seemed to me to mark the limits of Atlantis, of which we had in reality passed over only the smallest part. Much longer should I have remained at the window, admiring the beauties of the sea and sky, but the panels closed. At this moment, the Nautilus arrived at the side of this high perpendicular wall. What it would do, I could not guess. I returned to my room to no longer moved. I laid myself down with full intention of waking after a few hours' sleep, but it was 8 o'clock the next day when I entered the saloon. I looked at the manometer. It told me that the Nautilus was floating on the surface of the ocean. Besides, I heard the steps on the platform. I went to the panel. It was open. But instead of broad daylight, as I expected, I was surrounded by profound darkness. Where were we? Was I mistaken? Was it still night? No, not a star was shining, and night was not that utter darkness. I knew not what to think. Then a voice near me said, "Is that you, Professor?" "Ah, Captain," I answered. "Where are we?" "Underground, sir." "Underground?" I exclaimed. "And the Nautilus floating still?" It always floats, but I do not understand. Wait a few minutes, our lantern will be lit, and if you like light places, you will be satisfied. I stood on the platform and waited. The darkness was so complete that I could not even see Captain Nemo, but looking to the zenith exactly above my head, I seemed to catch an undecided gleam, a kind of twilight filling the circular hole. At this instant, the lantern was lit, and its vividness dispelled the faint light. I closed my dazzled eyes for an instant and then looked again. The Nautilus was stationary, floating near a mountain which formed sort of a quay. The lake then supporting it was a lake imprisoned by a circle of walls measuring 2 miles in diameter and 6 in circumference. Its level, the manometer showed, could only be the same as the outside level, for there must necessarily be a communication between the lake and the sea. The high partitions, leaning forward on their base, grew into the vaulted roof, bearing the shape of an immense funnel turned upside down. The height being about 500 or 600 yards, at the summit was a circular orifice by which I had caught the slight gleam of light, evidently daylight. Where were we? I asked. Where are we? In the very heart of an extinct volcano, the interior of which was invaded by the sea after some great convulsion of the earth. While you were sleeping, Professor, the Nautilus penetrated to this lagoon by a natural canal which opens about 10 yards beneath the surface of the ocean. This is its harbor of refuge, a shore commodious and mysterious one, sheltered from all the gales. Show me, if you can, on the coast of any of your continents or islands, a road which can give such perfect refuge from all storms. Certainly, I replied. You are in safety here, Captain Nemo. Who could reach you in the heart of a volcano? But did I not see an opening at its summit? Yes, it's a crater formerly filled with lava vapor and flames, and which now gives entrance to the life-giving air we breathe. But what is this volcanic mountain? It belongs to one of the numerous islands with which this sea is strewn. To vessels, a simple sandbank; to us, an immense cavern. Chance led me to discover it, and chance led me to let it go. But of what use is this refuge, Captain? The Nautilus wants no port. No, sir, but it wants electricity to make it move, and the wherewithal to make electricity, sodium, to feed the elements, coal from which to get the sodium, and a coal mine to supply the coal. And exactly on this spot, the sea covers entire forests embedded during the geological periods, now mineralized and transformed into coal. For me, they are an inexhaustible mine. Your men follow the trade of miners here, then, Captain? Exactly so. The mines extended under the waves like the mines of Newcastle. Here, in their diving dresses, pickaxe, shovel in hand, mines extract the coal, which I do not even ask from the mines of the earth. When I burn this combustible for the manufacture of sodium, the smoke escaping from the crater of the mountain gives it the appearance of a still active volcano. And we shall see your companions at work? No, not this time at least, for I am in a hurry to continue our submarine tour of the earth, so I shall content myself with drawing from the reserve of sodium I already possess. This time, the time for loading is only 1 day, and we continue our voyage. So if you wish to go over the cavern and make the round of the lagoon, you must take advantage today, Monsieur Arnaud. I thanked the captain and went to look for my companions, who had not yet left their cabin. I invited them to follow me without saying where we were. They mounted the platform. Counsel, who was astonished at nothing, seemed to look upon it as quite natural that he should wake under a mountain after having fallen asleep under the waves. But Ned Land thought of nothing but finding whether the cavern had any exit. After breakfast, about 10 o'clock, we went down to the mountain. Down onto the mountain. Here we are once more on land, said Counsel. I do not call this land, said the Canadian, and besides, we are not on it, but beneath it. Between the walls of the mountain and the waters of this lake lay a sandy shore, which at its greatest breadth measured 500 feet. On this soil, one might easily make the tour of the lake, but the base of the high partitions of the stony ground, with volcanic blocks and enormous pumice stones lying in picturesque heaps, all these detached masses covered with enamel polished by the action of subterraneous fires, stone resplendent by the light of our electric lantern. The mica dust from the shore rising under our feet flew like a cloud of sparks. The bottom now rose sensibly, and we soon arrived at long circaceous slopes, or inclined plains, which took us higher by degree. But we were obliged to walk carefully along these conglomerates bound by no cement, the feet slipping on glassy tracti composed of crystal, feldspar, and quartz. The volcanic nature of this enormous excavation was confirmed on all sides, and I pointed it out to my companions. Picture to yourselves, said I, what this crater must have been when filled with boiling lava, and when the level of the incandescent liquid rose to the orifice of the mountain as though melted on the top of a hot plate. I can picture it perfectly, said Counsel. But, sir, will you tell me why the great architect has suspended operations, and how it is the furnace is replaced by the quiet waters of the lake? Most probably, Counsel, because some convulsion beneath the ocean produced that very opening which has served as passage for the Nautilus. Then the waters of the Atlantic rushed into the interior of the mountain. There must have been a terrible struggle between the two elements, a struggle which ended in the victory of Neptune. But many ages have run out since then, and the submerged volcano is now a peaceful grotto. Very well, replied Ned Land. I accept the explanation, sir, but in our interests I regret that the opening of which you speak was not made above the level of the sea. But, friend Ned, said Counsel, if the passage had not been under the sea, the Nautilus could not have gone through it. We continued ascending. The steps became more and more perpendicular and narrow. Deep excavations, which we were obliged to cross, cut them here and there. Sloping masses had to be turned. We slid upon our knees and crawled along, but Council's dexterity and the Canadian strength surmounted all obstacles. At a height of about 31 feet, the nature of the ground changed without becoming more practicable. To the conglomerate and tracti succeeded black basalt, the first dispersed in layers full of bubbles, later forming regular prisms placed like in a colonnade, supporting the spring of an immense vault, an admirable specimen of natural architecture. Between the blocks of basalt wound long streams of lava, long since grown cold, encrusted with bituminous rays, and in some places there were spread large carpets of sulfur. A more powerful light shone through the upper crater, shedding a vague glimmer over those volcanic depressions forever buried in the bosom of this extinguished mountain. But our upward march as soon stopped at a height of about 250 feet by impassable obstacles. There was a complete vaulted arch overhanging us, and our ascent was changed to circular to walk. At the last change, vegetable of life began to struggle with the mineral. Some shrubs and even some trees grew from the fractures of the walls. I recognized some euphorbias with the caustic sugar coming from them. Heliotropes, quite incapable of justifying their name, sadly dropped their clusters of flowers, both of color and perfume, half gone. Here and there, some chrysanthemums grew timidly at the foot of an aloe with long, sickly-looking leaves. But between the streams of lava, I saw some little violets, still slightly perfumed, and I admit that I smelt them with delight. Perfume is the soul of the flower, and the sea flowers, those splendid hydrophytes, have no soul. We arrived at the foot of some sturdy dragon trees, which had pushed aside the rocks with their strong roots, when Ned Land exclaimed, "Ah, sir, a hive, a hive!" "A hive," I replied, with a gesture of incredulity. "Yes, a hive," repeated the Canadian, "the bees humming around it." I approached, and was bound to believe my own eyes. There at a hole, bored in one of the dragon trees, were some thousands of these ingenious insects, so common in all the Canaries, and whose produce is so much esteemed naturally enough. The Canadian wished to gather the honey, and I could not well oppose his wish. A quantity of dry leaves mixed with sulphur he lit with the spark from his flint, and he began to smoke out the bees. The humming ceased by degrees, and the hive eventually yielded several pounds of the sweetest honey, with which Ned Land filled his haversack. "When I have mixed this honey with the paste of the artocarpus," said he, "I shall be able to offer you a succulent cake." "Upon my word," said Council, "it will be gingerbread." "Never mind the gingerbread," said I. "Let us continue our interesting walk." At every turn of the path we were following, the lake appeared in all the length and breadth. The lantern lit up the whole of its peaceable surface, which knew neither ripple nor waves. The Nautilus remained perfectly immovable. On the platform and on the mountain, the ship's crew were working like black shadows clearly carved against the luminous atmosphere. We were now going round the highest crest of the first layers of rock which upheld the roof. I then saw that bees were not the only representatives of the animal kingdom in the interior of this volcano. Birds of prey hovered here and there in the shadows, or fled from their nests on top of the rocks, where were sparrowhawks with white breasts, and kestrels, and Down the slope scampered with their long legs several fine fat bustards. I leave any one to imagine the covetousness of the Canadian at the sight of this savory game, and whether he did not regret having no gun, but he did his best to replace the lead by stones, and after several fruitless attempts, he succeeded in wounding a magnificent bird. To say that he risked his life 20 times before reaching it, but he managed so well that the creature joined the honey cakes in his bag. We were now obliged to descend toward the shore, the crest becoming impracticable. Above us, the crater seemed to gape like the mouth of a well. From this place the sky could clearly be seen, and clouds dissipated by the west wind, leaving behind them, even on the summit of the mountain, their misty remnants, certain proof that they were only moderately high, for the volcano did not rise more than 800 feet above the level of the ocean. Half an hour after the Canadians' last exploit, we had regained the inner shore. Here, the flora was represented by large carpets of marine crystal. A little umbelliferous plant, very good to pickle, which also bears the name of pierstone and sea fennel. Council gathered some bundles of it. As to the fauna, it might be counted by thousands of crustacea of all sorts: lobsters, crabs, palomons, spider crabs, chameleon shrimps, and a large number of shells, rockfish, and limpets. 3/4 of an hour, we had finished our circassious walk and were on board. The crew had just finished loading the sodium, and the Nautilus could have left that instant. But Captain Nemo gave no order. Did he wish to wait until night and leave the submarine passage secretly? Perhaps so. Whatever it might be, the next day, the Nautilus, having left its port, steered clear of all land at a few yards beneath the waves of the Atlantic. Chapter 11. The Sargasso Sea. That day, the Nautilus crossed a singular part of the Atlantic Ocean. No one could be ignorant of the existence of a current of warm water known by the name of the Gulf Stream. After leaving the Gulf of Mexico about the 25th degree of north latitude, this current divides into two arms, the principal one going toward the coast of Ireland and Norway, while the second one bends to the south about the height of Azores, then touching the African shores, and describing a lengthened oval, restrous of Antilles. This second arm, it is rather a collar than an arm, surrounds with its circles of warm water that portion of the cold, quiet, immovable ocean called Sargasso Sea. A perfect lake in the open Atlantic, it takes no less than 3 years for the great current to pass round it. Such was the region the Nautilus was now visiting. A perfect meadow, a close carpet of seaweed, fucus, and tropical berries, so thick and so compact that the stem of the vessel could hardly tear its way through it, and not wishing to entangle his screw in this herbaceous mass, kept some yards beneath the surface of the waves. The name Sargasso comes from the Spanish word sargazo, which signifies kelp. This kelp, or verric, or berry plant, is the principal formation of this immense bank. And this is the reason, according to learned Maury, author of the Physical Geography of the Globe, why these hydrophytes unite in the peaceful basin of the Atlantic. The only explanation which can be given, he says, seems to me to result from the experience known to all the world. Place in a vase some fragments of cork or other floating body, and give to the water in a vase a circular movement. The scattered fragments will unite in a group in the center of the liquid surface, that is to say, in the part least agitated. In the phenomenon, we are considering the Atlantic is the vase, the Gulf Stream the circular current, and the Sargasso Sea the central point at which the floating bodies unite. I share Maury's opinion, and I was able to study the phenomenon in the very midst where vessels rarely penetrate. Above us floated products of all kinds, heaped up among the brownish plants, trunks of trees torn from the Andes or the Rocky Mountains, and floated by the Amazon or the Mississippi, numerous wrecks, remains of keels or ships' bottoms, side planks stove in, and so weighted with shells and barnacles that they could not again rise to the surface. This time will one day justify Maury's other opinion, that these substances, thus accumulated for ages, will become petrified by the action of the water, and will then form inexhaustible coal mines, a precious reserve prepared by far-seeing nature for the moment when men shall have exhausted the mines of the continents. In the midst of this inextricable mass of plants and seaweed, I noticed some charming pink halcyons and antennae, and their long tentacles trailing after them, medusae, green, red, and blue, and the great rhizotomes of Cuvier, the large umbrella of which was bordered and festooned with violet. All the day of the 22nd of February, we passed in the Sargasso Sea, where such fish as are partial to marine plants and fuci and abundant nourishment. The next, the ocean had returned to its accustomed aspect. From this time, for 19 days, from the 23rd of February to the 12th of March, the Nautilus kept in the middle of the Atlantic, carrying us to constant speed of 100 leagues in 24 hours. Captain Nemo evidently intended accomplishing his submarine program, and I imagined that he intended, after doubling Cape Horn, to return to the Australian seas of the Pacific. Ned Land had cause for fear. In these large seas, void of islands, we could not attempt to leave the boat, nor had we any means of opposing Captain Nemo's will. Our only course was to submit. But what we could neither gain by force nor cunning, I like to think might be obtained by persuasion. This voyage ended. Would he not consent to restore our liberty? Under an oath never to reveal his existence, an oath of our honor, which we should have regulatories kept. But we must consider that delicate question with Captain. But was I free to claim this liberty? Had he not himself said from the beginning in the firmest manner that the secret of his life exacted from him our lasting imprisonment on board the Nautilus? And would not my 4 months' silence appear to him a tacit acceptance of our situation? And would not a return to the subject result in raising suspicions which might be hurtful to our projects, if at some future time a favorable opportunity offered to return to them? During the 19 days mentioned above, no incident of any note happened to signalize our voyage. I saw little of Captain Nemo. He was at work in the library. I often found his books left open, especially those on natural history. My work on submarine depths, conned over by him, was covered with marginal notes, often contradicting my theories and systems. But the captain contented himself with thus purging my work. It was very rare for him to discuss it with me. Sometimes I heard the melancholy tones of his organ, but only at night, in the midst of the deepest obscurity, when the Nautilus slept upon the deserted ocean. During this part of our voyage, we sailed whole days on the surface of the waves. The sea seemed abandoned. A few sailing vessels on the road to India were making for the Cape of Good Hope. One day we were followed by boats of a whaler, who, no doubt, took us for some enormous whale of great price. But Captain Nemo did not wish the worthy fellows to lose their time and trouble, so ended the chase by plunging under the water. Our navigation continued until the 13th of March. That day, the Nautilus was employed in taking soundings, which greatly interested me. We had then made about 13,000 leagues since our departure from the high seas of the Pacific. The bearings gave us 45 degrees 37 south latitude and 37 degrees 53 west longitude. It was the same water in which Captain Denham of the Herald sounded 7,000 fathoms without finding the bottom. There, too, Lieutenant Parker of the American frigate Congress could not touch the bottom with 15,140 yards. Captain Nemo intended seeking the bottom of the ocean by a diagonal sufficiently lengthened by means of lateral planes placed at an angle of 45 degrees with water line of the Nautilus. Then the screw set to work its maximum speed, its four blades beating the waves with indescribable force. Under this powerful pressure, the hull of the Nautilus quivered like a sonorous cord and sank regularly under the water. At 7,000 fathoms, I saw some blackish tops rising from the midst of the waters, but these summits might belong to high mountains like the Himalayas or Mount Blanc. Even higher, and the depths of the abyss remained incalculable. The Nautilus descended still lower. In spite of the great pressure, I felt the steel plates tremble like the fastenings of the bolts, its bar bent, its partitions grounded. The windows of the saloon seemed to curve under the pressure of the waters, and this firm structure would double have yielded if its captain had said. It had not been capable of resistance like a solid block. In skirting the declivity of these rocks, lost under the water, I still saw some shells, some cerfuli, some spinoforbs still living, and some specimens of asteroids. But soon, this last representative of animal life disappeared, and at depth of more than 3 leagues, the Nautilus had passed the limits of submarine existence, even as the balloon does when it rises above the respirable atmosphere. We had attained a depth of 16,000 yards, 4 leagues, and the sides of the Nautilus then bore a pressure of 1,600 atmospheres, that is to say, 3,200 pounds to each square 2/5 of an inch of its surface. What a situation to be in, I exclaimed, to overrun these deep regions where man has never trod. Look, Captain, look at these magnificent rocks, these uninhabited grottos, these lowest receptacles of the globe, where life is no longer possible. What unknown sights are here? Why should we be unable to pressure a remembrance of them? Would you like to carry away more than the remembrance? Said Captain Nemo. What do you mean by that, by those words? I mean to say that nothing is easier than to take a photographic view of this submarine region. I had not time to be surprised at this new proposition when, at Captain Nemo's call, an objective was brought into the saloon. Through the widely open panel, the liquid mass was bright with electricity, which was distributed with such uniformity that not a shadow, not a graduation was to be seen in our manufactured light. The Nautilus remained motionless, the force of its screw subdued by the inclination of its planes, and the instruments was propped on the bottom of the oceanic sight, and in a few seconds we had obtained a perfect negative. I here give the positive, which may be seen by those primitive rocks which have never looked upon the light of heaven, that lowest granite which forms the foundation of the globe, those deep grottos woven in the stony mass whose outlines were of such sharpness, and the border lines of which are marked in black, as if done by the brush of some Flemish artist. Beyond that again a horizon of mountains, an admirable undulating line forming the perspective of its landscape. I cannot describe the effect of these smooth, blackish, polished rocks, without moss, without a spot, and of strange form, standing solidly on the sandy carpet, which sparkled under the jets of our electric light. But the operation being over, Captain Nemo said, "Let us go up again. We must not abuse our position, nor expose the Nautilus too long to such great pressure." "Go up again?" I exclaimed. "Hold well on." I had not time to understand why the captain cautioned me thus, when I was thrown forward on the carpet at a signal from the captain. Its screw was shipped and its blades raised vertically. The Nautilus shot into the air like a balloon, rising with stunning rapidity and cutting the mass of waters with sonorous agitation. Nothing was visible, and in 4 minutes it had shot through the 4 leagues which separated it from the ocean, and, after emerging like a flying fish, fell, making the waves rebound to an enormous height. Chapter 12. Shallots and Whales. Oh, am I glitching still? I hope I'm not. Can everyone hear me? Is everything coming through all right? You can comment down below. Good. Thank you so much. I can't often, as you know, look at the comments because I have my nose in a book, but we're fine now. Good. All right. Carrying on. Chapter 12. Shallots and Whales. During the nights of the 13th and the 14th of March, the Nautilus returned to its southerly course. I fancied that when on level with Cape Horn, he would turn the helm westward in order to beat the Pacific seas and so complete the tour of the world. He did nothing of the kind, but continued on his way to the southern regions. Where was he going? To the pole? It was madness. I began to think that the captain's temerity justified Ned Land's fears. For some time past, the Canadian had not spoken to me of the projects of flight. He was less communicative, almost silent. I could see that his lengthened imprisonment was weighing upon him, and I felt that rage was burning within him. When he met the captain, his eyes lit up with suppressed anger, and I feared that his natural violence would lead him into some extreme. That day, the 14th of March, counsel and he came to me to my room. I inquired the cause of their visit. "A simple question to ask you, sir," replied the Canadian. "Speak, Ned. How many men are there on board the Nautilus, do you think?" "I cannot tell, friend. I should say that its working does not require a large crew. Certainly, under existing conditions, 10 men at most ought to be enough." Why should there be any more?" "Why?" I replied, looking fixedly at Ned Land, whose meanings was easy to guess. "Because," I added, "if my surmises are correct, and if I have well understood the captain's existence, the Nautilus is not only a vessel, it's also a place of refuge for those who, like its commander, have broken every tie upon earth." "Perhaps so," said counsel. "But in any case, the Nautilus can only contain a certain number of men. Could not you, sir, estimate their maximum?" "How, counsel?" "By calculation. Given the size of the vessel, which you know, sir, and consequently the quantity of air it contains, knowing also how much each man expends at a breath and comparing these results with the fact that the Nautilus is obliged to go to the surface every 24 hours. Counsel had not finished the sentence before I saw what he was driving at. I understand, said I, but that calculation, though simple enough, can give but a very uncertain result. Never mind, said Ned Land urgently. Here it is, said I. In 1 hour, each man consumes the oxygen contained in 20 gallons of air, and in 24 that contained in 480 gallons. We must therefore find how many times 480 gallons of air the Nautilus contains. Just so, said Counsel. Or, I continued, the size of the Nautilus being 1,500 tons, and 1 ton holding 200 gallons, it contains 300,000 gallons of air, which divided by 480 gives a quotient of 625, which means to say, strictly speaking, that the air contained in the Nautilus would suffice for 625 men for 24 hours. 625? Repeated Ned. But remember, that is all of us, passengers, sailors, and officers included, would not form a 10th part of that number. Still 2 men for 3 men, murmured Counsel. The Canadian shook his head, passed his hand across his forehead, and left the room without answering. Will you allow me to make one observation, sir, said Counsel. Poor Ned is longing for everything that he cannot have. His past life is always present to him. Everything that we are forbidden he regrets. His head is full of old recollections, and we must understand him. What has he to do here? Nothing. He is not learned like you, sir, and has not the same taste for the beauties of the sea that we have. He would risk everything to be able to go once more into a tavern in his own country. Certainly, the monotony on board must seem intolerable to the Canadian, accustomed as he was to life of liberty and activity. Events were rare which could rouse him to any show of spirit, but that day an event did happen, which recalled the bright days of the harpooner. About 11 in the morning, being on the surface of the ocean, the Nautilus fell in with a troop of whales, an encounter hunted to the death. An encounter, the Nautilus encounter, which did not astonish me, knowing that these creatures, hunted to the death, had taken refuge in the high latitudes. We were seated on the platform of a quiet sea. The month of October in those latitudes gave us some lovely autumnal days. It was the Canadian, he could not be mistaken, who signaled a whale on the eastern horizon. Looking attentively, one might see its black back rise and fall, the waves 5 miles from the Nautilus. Ah, exclaimed Ned Land, if I was on board a whaler now, such a meeting would give me pleasure. It is one of a large size. See with what strength its blowholes throw up columns of air and steam. Confound it, why am I bound to these 2 plates? What, Ned, said I, you have not forgotten your old ideas of fishing? Can a whaler ever forget his old trade, sir? Can he ever tire of the emotions caused by such a chase? You have never flashed in these seas. You have never fished in these seas, Ned. Never, sir. In the northern only, and as much in Bering as in Davis Straits. Then the southern whale is still unknown to you. It is the Greenland whale you have hunted up to this time, and that would not risk passing for ever. Whales are localized according to their kinds in certain seas which they never leave. And if one of these creatures went from Bering to Davis Straits, it must be simply because there is a passage from one sea to the other, either on the American or the Asiatic side. In that case, as I have never fished in these seas, I do not know the kind of whale frequenting them. I have told you, Ned. A greater reason for making their acquaintance, said Counsel. Look, exclaimed the Canadian. They approach, they aggravate me. They know that I cannot get at them. Ned stamped his feet. His hand trembled as he grasped an imaginary harpoon. "Are these cetacea as large as those of the northern seas?" asked he. "Very nearly, Ned, because I have seen large whales, sir, whales measuring 100 feet. I have been even told that those of Halmuck and Olgamec of the Albanian islands are sometimes 150 feet long. That seems to me exaggeration. These creatures are only balantorphones, provided with dorsal fins, and, like the shallots, are generally much smaller than the Greenland whales." "Ah!" exclaimed the Canadian, whose eyes had never left the ocean. "They are coming nearer. In some water of the Nautilus, in the same water as the Nautilus." Then returning to the conversation, he said, "You spoke of the shallot of a small creature. I have heard of gigantic ones. They are intelligent. It is said of some of that they cover themselves with seaweed and fucus, and then are taken for islands. People encamp upon them, and settle there, light a fire, and build houses." "Joker," said Ned Land, "and one fine day the creature plunges, carrying with it all inhabitants to the bottom of the sea." "Something like the travels of Sinbad the Sailor," I replied, laughing. "Ah!" suddenly exclaimed Ned Land, "it is not one whale. There are 10. There are 20. It's a whole troop, and I'm not able to do anything, hands and feet tied." "But, friend Ned," said Council, "why do you not ask Captain Nemo's permission to chase them?" Council had not finished his sentence when Ned Land had lowered himself through the panel to seek the captain. A few minutes afterward, the two appeared together on the platform. Captain Nemo watched the troop of the cetacea playing on the waters about a mile from the Nautilus. "They are southern whales," said he. "There goes the fortune of a whole fleet of whalers." "Well, sir," asked the Canadian, "can I not chase them, if only to remind me of my old trade of a harpooner?" "And to what purpose?" replied Captain Nemo. "Only to destroy? We have nothing to do with the whale oil on board." "But, sir," continued the Canadian, "in the Red Sea you allowed us to follow the dugong. Then it was procedure, fresh meat for my crew. Here it would be killing for killing's sake. I know that it is a privilege reserved for man, but I do not approve of such murderous pastime. In destroying the southern whale, like the Greenland whale, in an inoffensive creature, your traders do culpable action, Master Land. They have already depopulated the whole of Baffin's Bay, and are annihilating a class of useful animals, leaving the unfortunate cetacea alone. They have plenty of natural enemies, capholites, swordfish, and sawfish, without your troubling them." The captain was right. The barbarous and inconsiderate greed of these fishermen will one day cause the disappearance of the last whale in the ocean. Ned Land whistled Yankee Doodle between his teeth, thrust his hands into his pockets, and turned his back upon us. But Captain Nemo watched the troop of the cetacea, and addressing me said, "I was right in saying that whales had natural enemies enough without counting man. These will have plenty to do before long. Do you see, Monsieur Arnaud, about 8 miles to leeward, those blackish moving points?" "Yes, Captain," I replied. "Those are the shallots, terrible animals, which I have sometimes met in troops of 2 or 3. They are cruel, mischievous creatures. They would be right in exterminating them." The Canadian turned quickly at the last words. "Well, Captain," said he, "it's still time in the interest of the whales. It is useless to express oneself, Professor. The Nautilus will disperse them. It is armed with a steel spur, as good as Master Land's harpoon, I imagine." The Canadian did not put himself out enough to shrug his shoulders. Attack cetacea with blows of a spur? Who had ever heard of such a thing? "Wait, Monsieur Arnaud," said Captain Nemo. We will show you something you have never yet seen. We have no pity for these ferocious creatures. They are nothing but mouth and teeth. Mouth and teeth. No one could better describe the Mascoporeus charlotte, which is sometimes more than 75 feet long. Its enormous head occupies 1/3 of its entire body. Better armed than the whale, whose upper jaw is furnished only with whalebone, it is supplied with 25 large tusks, about 8 inches long, cylindrical and conical at the top, each weighing 2 pounds. But it is in the upper part of this enormous head, in great cavities divided by cartilages, that is to be found from 600 to 800 pounds of that precious oil called spermaceti. The charlotte is a disagreeable creature, more tadpole than fish, according to Friedel's description. It is badly formed, the whole of its left side being, if we may say it, a failure, and only being able to see with its right eye. But the formidable troop was nearing us. They had seen the whales and were preparing to attack them. One could judge beforehand that the charlottes would be victorious, not only because they were better built for attack than their inoffensive adversaries, but also because they could remain longer underwater without coming to the surface. There was only just time to go out and help of the whales. The Nautilus went under the water. Counsel, Ned Land, and I took our places before the window of the saloon, and Captain Nemo joined the pilot in his cage to work the apparatus as an engine of destruction. Soon I felt the beatings of the screw quicken, and our speed increased. The battle between the charlottes and the whales had already begun when the Nautilus arrived. They did not at first show fear at any sight of this new monster joining in the conflict. But as soon as the guard against its blows, what a battle! The Nautilus was nothing but formidable harpoon, brandished by its hand of its captain. It hurled itself against the fleshy mass, passing through from one part to another, leaving behind 2 quivering halves of the animal. It could not feel the formidable blows from the tails upon its sides, nor the shock which it produced itself, much more. One charlotte killed, it ran the next, tacked on the spot that it might not miss its prey, going forward and backward, answering it to its helm, plunging when the cetacean divided into the deep waters, coming up with it when returned to the surface, striking its front sideways, cutting or tearing in all directions, and at any pace piercing it with its terrible spur. What carnage! What noise on the surface of the waves! What sharp hissing what snorting peculiar to these enraged animals! In the midst of these waters, generally so peaceful, their tails made the feet billows. For 1 hour, this wholesale massacre continued, from which the charlottes could not escape. Several times 10 or several united tried to crush the Nautilus by their weight. From the window, we could see their enormous mouths studded with tusks, and their formidable eyes. Ned Land could not contain himself. He threatened and swore at them. He could feel them clinging to our vessel like dogs worrying a wild boar in a copse. But the Nautilus, working its screw, carried them here and there, or to upper levels of the ocean, without caring for their enormous weight, nor the powerful strain on the vessel. At length, the mass of the charlottes broke up, the waves became quiet, and I felt that we were rising to the surface. The panel opened, and we hurried on the platform. The sea was covered with mutilated bodies. A formidable explosion could not have divided and torn this fleshy mass with more violence. We were floating amid gigantic bodies, bluish on the back and white underneath, covered with enormous protuberances. Some terrified shallots were flying toward the horizon. The waves were dyed red for several miles, and the Nautilus floated in a sea of blood. Captain Nemo joined us. "Well, Master Land," said he. "Well, sir," replied the Canadian, whose enthusiasm had somewhat calmed. "It is a terrible spectacle, certainly, but I am not a butcher. I am a hunter, and I call this butchery." "It is a massacre of the mischievous creatures," replied the captain, "and the Nautilus is not a butcher's knife." "I like my harpoon better," said the Canadian. "Every one to his own," answered the captain, looking fixedly at Ned Land. I feared he would commit some set violence which would end in sad consequences. But his anger turned by the sight of the whale which the Nautilus had just come up with. One moment. The creature had not quite escaped from the Charlotte's teeth. I recognized the southern whale by its flat head, which is certainly black. Anatomically, it is distinguished from the white whale and the North Cape whale by the 7 cervical vertebrae, and it has 2 more ribs than its conjoiners. The unfortunate cetacean was lying on its side, riddled with holes from the bites, and, quite dead, from its mutilated fin still hung a young whale, which it could not save from the massacre. Its open mouth let the water flow in and out, murmuring like the waves breaking on the shore. Captain Nemo steered close to the corpse of the creature. 2 of his men mounted its side, and I saw, not without surprise, that they were drawing from its breasts all the milk which they contained, that is to say, about 2 or 3 tons. The captain offered me a cup of the milk, which was still warm. I could not help showing my repugnance to the drink, but he assured me that it was excellent, and not to be distinguished from cow's milk. I tasted it, and it was of his opinion. It was useful reserves for us, for in the shape of salt, butter, or cheese, it would form an agreeable variety from our ordinary food. From that day, I noticed with uneasiness that Ned Land's ill will toward Captain Nemo increased, and I resolved to watch the Canadian's gestures closely. And there we have it for the evening. Are you enjoying this book? I know it's got a lot of words, but a lot of words I don't even know, but it's so lovely to see you. Let me go through and say hello. Good evening, Christy Cragen, Faith, Trust, and Pixie Dust. I'm a little bit late. Welcome. It's glitchy. Sam Zog says it's better now. It's good. Red Panda says it's fine now. Message restricted. Let's see what that message is. I don't know what that is. I don't know why. I can't read that message. Am I making any new paintings? My lovelies, I have been on a brief hiatus. I have not been inspired, but I shall be. I have some ideas that I would like to get out of my head and onto canvas. I do have art for sale. I have 5 or 6 or 7 go. I would like them all to go. If you message me, I will give you a great price. I've got a whole collection of smaller occult symbols that need to go. I just have paintings that need to go. And Lucifer's Girl says, thank you for reading to us. You're most welcome. Sam Zog says, beautifully read and looking classy. The book has a lot of great words, so it's lovely to listen to. Yes, thank you. It has a lot of words that I don't know because I don't study the ocean, so I don't know. I don't know what they are. I'm afraid in that instance, if I were on board, I might be a little close to the Canadian who is not quite as educated. I am educated in other ways, just not the ways of the ocean. Anyway, my lovelies, I so appreciate each and every one of you. Straighten the tie. I so appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for all of the likes, the comments, and the shares. We will be joining again, not this month. We're on hiatus with Scared and Alone, but Scared and Alone will be coming back again. John Maxwell says the English by today's standards are a little cumbersome. Some might say, yes, it is quite. Sam says, take care of yourself. Thanks for the artfulness you add to the world. Thank you, everybody. I love you all so very much. I appreciate you. I send out lots of love. And I hope you have a good evening, a good morning, a good night. And we shall chat in the future. Ashley says, can we have some hot tea together? You know what? Actually, yes, I will tell you that. I love tea. I love tea. But I have to start altering my habits. So I've learned, and I've known I am lactose intolerant for a long while, but it seems to be getting worse. Like the gluten bothers me. Add that to the list of things. So deadly nightshades, tomatoes, potatoes, almonds bother me because it has arsen in it. So I'm not really a delicate flower. It's just I have to eat like my ancestors ate. So maybe I am a vampire. Actually, I will tell you this. I don't like to eat publicly because I'm always afraid that I'm going to break out into some horrendous allergic reaction. So anyway, but I'm doing what I can. Oh, I found out too. I'm going to show you something. I have a beautiful ring that I've worn. It's gold, and I found it, by the way. I thought I left it in my dry cleaning, but I didn't. I found it. Gold has, I don't know if you can see this, gold has nickel in it, and I have developed an allergy to gold. I knew I was allergic to silver before, so I have a metal allergy. I'm hoping that goes away because I love my ring. Anyway, so with that, I bid you good evening, good night, good morning, and I love you. I shall see you in the future. Take care. Good night.